Good morning, and welcome to the First Unitarian Congregation of Ottawa. My name is Casey, a member of the board here at FirstU. It's good to be with you. If you are new to FirstU and would like to learn more about us, please contact us through our email at welcome@firstunitarianottawa.ca. Following our service at 11:30 a.m., do join us as well for our virtual hospitality hour. You may find the Zoom link on our website at firstunitarianottawa.ca or in our weekly email newsletter, the EUU. It is more important than ever to sign up to receive the EUU, to check our Facebook page and our webpage for notices and updates, because our online calendar is as full as ever. We're looking for people to join with experience to join our finance committee. Please contact our treasurer if you are interested in becoming a finance member. The Embracing Diversity Committee is also looking for new members. Contact the chair, Tara, to learn more about our Embracing Diversity Committee. If you are uncertain about how to reach our treasurer or Embracing Diversity chair, please contact the office at uuoffice@firstunitarianottawa.ca. The Board and Campus Planning Committee wish to thank everyone who came out to our town hall last Saturday to discuss what we are excited and concerned about with regard to development on campus, and to hear a presentation by CADCO, our nonprofit development consultant. There will be another meeting on March 27th at 10:30 a.m. Whatever your heritage, whatever your faith, whomever you love, and however you identify, today you are a part of our spiritual community.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris, and I'm delighted to be your worship associate this morning. As mentioned, please check out our Facebook page, website, and weekly EUU emails for information about all the happenings in the congregation. Some announcements to highlight. If you would like your child or children to be a part of a child dedication ceremony during the Sunday, April 18th service, please contact Reverend Pat at minister@firstunitarianottawa.ca. Last Friday's EUU has links to join Thursday afternoon's discussion circle and next Saturday's trivia quiz night. We also have a message from the Environmental Action Group. We are halfway through our Lower Your Carbon Footprint Food Challenge. You can still join us for the final half. Just keep your challenge sheets until Earth Day week. This week's challenge is to buy some seeds to plant for later spring transplanting. Spring has sprung, and seed sellers say there is an early rush this spring. Check out the article in the Enviro Bits. Also, look at the new Enviro Bites recipe. There's a link to the challenge chart and our Enviro Bites in the EUU or on the FirstU website, Climate Confrontation page. We have started a new Enviro advocacy project. The federal government is preparing for the 2021 budget. This is the moment to revision our society and create a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future. There are a number of environmental groups joining together to advocate for a green and just society. Go to the EUU or to the Climate Confrontation page, where this week we will link you to the David Suzuki Foundation. There, you can contact our leaders, asking them to ensure our pandemic recovery is green and just. And as usual, don't miss this week's Enviro Bits. Please welcome our minister, the Reverend Patricia Guthmann-Haresch.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Casey, and thank you, Deirdre, and our team in the back. Bonjour. Good morning, everyone. It does seem that spring has sprung. Yesterday was the spring equinox, equal day and equal night. We're halfway there to summer solstice. Yay. It is the Persian and Baha'i New Year, and it is the pagan time of Austera. May we all feel the hope and joy of fresh beginnings. Today, I will be speaking about one of the sources that we say as UUs we draw upon, humanist teachings. Before we light the chalice, I read from the Reverend Victoria Safford's actually award-winning sermon, All That Is Past is Prologue. And Victoria says, ours is a saving church. And by that I mean that lives are saved within it. People say that. They use the old vocabulary. They say, I never knew there was a place like this where I could be accepted. They say, I never knew there could be a congregation that believed as I do. They say, I walked out of the church as soon as I was old enough, but until I came here, I had no idea how deeply I was longing for connection to other people and to the sacred. They say I was a spiritual shipwreck, and I'm still drifting, but at least I have a home. Here was a religion welcoming science and reason while honoring mystery and wonder. Here was a religion concerned more with deeds than creeds. A church in its Sunday schools that taught children to think and act and feel, to know their hearts instead of to recite. I felt not as if my soul were saved, but as if myself were somehow integrated, my integrity restored. As mind and heart and soul were reunited, as after a long, strange, unnatural parting of the waves. May you feel restored and whole this morning.
Chalice, chalice, burning bright, help remind us with your light of how we'd like to live each day, with love and truth helping lead the way.
Hi everyone, hope everyone is doing great on this Sunday. It's Nao, your Director of Religious Exploration, and today I'm sharing with you a story about springtime. One morning, Mother Nature looked about her. She said, "My children have had such a nice long rest, and it will do them good, for they have a busy summer before them. It is time to go to work now, and as some of the babies just won't wake up till they have to, I must send for my helpers at once." The long days carried her messages, which in our language would have read something like this. "My dear helpers, sunbeams and raindrops, you are needed here on earth. It is time to dress my plant children and give them work to do. The birds must be called back from the south, and the cocoons must be opened so that my butterflies can come out. I shall have to make good soil and get my clover beds ready for the honey makers. Come at once, as some have been sleeping too long already. Whisper to the trees as you pass that it is time they were budding. Be gentle with all, for they are my children, and I love them. Goodbye from your Mother Nature." This she directed to the sunbeams at Blue Sky Park and the raindrops at Cloudland. When the message reached these little helpers, they started off at once to obey the call, and the sun gave such a merry laugh that Grandma came to the door of the farmhouse and remarked, "How warm it is today, quite like spring. I believe I will set out my geraniums." But just then a silvery voice said, "Wait a little longer till we make the ground soft." And pop came a raindrop upon the dear old lady's nose, and she hurried into the house, saying, "What queer weather we are having! First sun, and then rain." Then the raindrops and sunbeams smiled at each other and danced more merrily, for they knew what good work they were doing to the great brown house where the flowers dwell. The tap-tap of the raindrops wakes them up, and when they raised their sleepy heads and felt the warm kisses of the sunbeams, they were glad and began to grow. Soft breezes called to the leaves to come out, and soon the brown coats which the trees had worn all winter were replaced by new green dresses. Pussy willows and snowdrops were the first to herald the spring, and violets soon followed. Out in the woods blossomed tiny pink, white mayflowers. Little seeds burst off their jackets and sent up green plumes. Then Mother Nature called her helpers again and told them to search for the lilies and dress them in white robes for Easter. And so each beautiful flower came again, and the birds sang once more, and the children were glad that spring had come again. The little helpers had done their work well and were happy, and everyone thanked God for the spring. Hope all of you enjoyed that story. Wishing everyone a very lovely Sunday.
Die Gedanken sind frei, my thoughts freely flower. Die Gedanken sind frei, my thoughts give me power. No scholar can map them, no hunter can trap them, no one can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei. My thoughts are as free as wind or the ocean, and no one can see their form or their motion. No hunter can find them, no trap ever bind them. My lips may be still, but I think what I will. A glimmering fire, the darkness will brighten. My soaring desire, all troubles can lighten. Though prison unfold me, its walls cannot hold me. No captive I'll be, for my spirit is free.
This is the time when we can send our earnest hopes or wishes, which some people call prayers, to the people who we care about. I invite you to think about your relationship with this community and how it can support you in the good times and the not so good. Think about your hopes and your hurts and how sharing them with like-minded people can make you feel. In these COVID times, it is more difficult to get together with people, but it is probably doubly important that we do try to stay together and connect with people either by phone or by Zoom or in person if you can manage that safely. Someday, this will all be over, we hope. Daffodils Waking by Karen Lewis Foley. At the height of the siege of cold and snow, rain and flooding, a warning sign, like those that say, "Children at play," or "cattle crossing," was posted on Westford Street, just a little way up from the church. It said, "Daffodils Waking." Well, who would have guessed? I hadn't even seen green shoots, but someone, whoever designed and posted the sign by the road, was going on faith. Someone was hoping against the evidence that somewhere under the earth, the daffodil bulbs were still there and starting to wake up. Someone noticed the light was staying longer on the earth, and the birds had new notes in their songs. Someone said to him or herself, "I'm going to spread a little hope among the folks with whom I share this corner of the earth." The letter to the Hebrews in the Bible says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." Assurance, conviction. These are very strong words. Things hoped for, but not seen. That's what faith does in us. It goes against the evidence. It hopes, not as in, "I hope it won't rain on our picnic," but as in, "I hope we'll find a way to balance the budget," or "I hope human beings undergo a change in consciousness that brings about a more just and merciful existence to all things." Hope seems to me the growing edge of faith. It is what makes us keep on keeping on. It makes us go forward against evidence, even against failure. It makes us take our feet out of bed each morning and put them on the floor, even after a sleepless night of worry and no evidence that things will be better tomorrow. Hoping against evidence keeps us alive, moving, working, praying, giving ourselves to the human enterprise. I am sure daffodils are waking. Now is the time when we recognize personal joys and sorrows. We do this by placing stones in the water and allowing the ripples to send those thoughts out to the universe. I put a stone for Barbara, a stone of congratulations to Eva for a new grandson, Charlie. A stone of congratulations to Margaret and David, whose 8-month-old grandson is now clapping. A stone for sadness for the lives lost in the shootings in Atlanta, and a stone of care for the victims of the loved ones. A stone for all the Asians in North America who are living in fear, and a stone of concern for the rise of anti-Asian violence here in Canada, as well as during the pandemic. A stone of congratulations. Our financial manager, Michelle, and her husband have welcomed a new granddaughter. I believe it's their first grandchild. I put a stone of hope, as today is the International Day for the Elimination of Discrimination. And a stone of congratulations, I guess, to the folks at Unitarian House who have had their second and final vaccine. And I put a last stone for all the joys and concerns kept in the recesses of our heart. We will now have a moment of silence.
Giants of majestic silence, giants of majestic silence, giants of majestic, majestic, majestic. Silence to snow on roofs at the beach on Sunday, to quiet to breathe, to acceptance, to dreams, to disclosure.
Before this morning's reading, I have two more stones to share. A stone of care for Ellen. It has been 8 years since Marlene's death. And a stone of joy for Ellen on her 75th birthday. Our reading is from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. "That's the way it's done," the Queen said with great decision. "Nobody can do two things at once, you know. Let's consider your age to begin with. How old are you?" "I'm 7.5 exactly." "You needn't say exactly," the Queen remarked. "I can believe it without that. Now I'll give you something to believe. I'm just 101, 5 months and a day." "I can't believe that," said Alice. "Can't you?" the Queen said in a pitying tone. "Try again. Draw a long breath and shut your eyes." Alice laughed. "There's no use trying," she said. "One can't believe impossible things." "I dare say you haven't had much practice," said the Queen. "When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast."
Now, that would be a different sermon, right? About the good thing about thinking about 6 impossible things before breakfast. But I think for many of you, you've probably remained you or came to Unitarian Universalism or to FirstU because you could no longer believe impossible things. Or out there, you were told you couldn't do or be or believe what you knew was right and true. And here you knew it could be possible. As Victoria Safford said in that chalice reading I shared with you, I felt not as if my soul were saved, but as if myself were somehow integrated, my integrity restored, as mind and heart and soul were reunited, as if after a long, strange, unnatural parting of the ways. We are indebted to all those who came before us, who were looking for a faith tradition and a community where they could be true in their heart and soul and mind, where they could be their true selves, even if over the centuries it sometimes meant public shame, persecution, exile, imprisonment, sometimes sacrificing one's own life. Among those Unitarians who set themselves apart from the conventional thinking of their day were those who called themselves humanists, starting in the 1920s. They didn't come from an unbroken chain going back to the classical humanists you may have studied about of the ancient Greek or Roman times, or even of the Italian Renaissance. It was a movement that gelled after controversies that almost split the American Unitarian Association in the last half of the 1800s, an organization of which Canada was a part, and Canada would get their ministers from the American Unitarian Association. Our Unitarian and Universalist forebears through the centuries leaned towards reason, deeds over creeds, the improvement of individual lives in the greater society through education, that people were inherently good, not sinners, not inherently evil. A defining text for North American Unitarians came in the 1800s, as early as 1819, with William Ellery Channing's sermon, Unitarian Christianity. And back in that day, before the internet, people would have passed out the pamphlets that had Unitarian Christianity. The primary points were these. It was the unity of God and the rejection of the Trinity, meaning that Jesus isn't God any more than any other person, but an important prophet with important teachings. Seeing God as having a loving and parental nature, not Mr. Angry Thunder God, right? The rejection of the doctrine of original sin. And what does that mean? Just that humans are inherently good. The importance of reason in understanding the Bible and discovering religious truth, not just faith, but a reasoned faith. Within 20 years after Channing's sermon, the transcendentalist ideas of birthright Unitarians, such as Emerson and Thoreau, had their impact on Unitarians and the greater society. What they told us is perhaps the divine spark could be found within ourselves, or the woods, or a salon in my living room, or books. Imagine that. Did we need the church? The ideas and teachers of Buddhism and Hinduism were arriving in North America. Perhaps Christianity wasn't the only source of wisdom. As the century progressed, Darwinism, the theory of evolution, was circulating. How might science and religion be reconciled? These were all the things Unitarians and the greater society were grappling with. In the 1860s, one of our own was thrown out. It's so hard to imagine this these days, was thrown out of his Unitarian pulpit by the New Hampshire Supreme Court, no less, in the States. And I'm speaking of the Reverend Francis Ellingwood Abbott. UU minister Don Rollins notes, the court found its damning evidence in Abbott's sermons, setting on two excerpts to make its case. Abbott denied Jesus' exceptionalism, denied biblical authority, and denied Israel as the only Holy Land. Abbott was in effect taking Jesus off the cross, redefining Scripture as being more than just something in a book, and expanding the notion of sacred ground to be any place where the human soul yearns. The court wasted no time in ruling against Abbott, declaring him insufficiently Christian. Some of my colleagues would not find that a great problem, but declaring him insufficiently Christian, it forbade both he and his remaining followers to use their Dover, New Hampshire church building. So much for separation of the church and state. I think we would define it differently these days. In the latter half of the 1860s, Unitarians themselves within were diverging theologically. Abbott represented just one group of Unitarians. At that time, in the 1860s, the Reverend Henry Whitney Bellows identified at least four factions in the Unitarian movement. Maybe we could figure out more these days theologically. At the time, there were those, he said, who were more evangelical and held to the miraculous nature of Jesus' life and works. Those who represented a more theologically traditional and institutional conservative Unitarianism. You wouldn't have been able to tell much difference between them and their Protestant colleagues. Those who were strongly anti-creedal and wanted to include world religions other than Christianity into Unitarianism. And finally, a group that called themselves the Broad Church Men, who strove to unite all the factions together. Can't we all get along to try and include a theologically open, broad group? Up until that point, you could join and be part of the American Unitarian Association as an individual. Now we talk about covenanting together as independent congregations. One of the first movements towards being a part of the denomination as a congregation, as a church, started in 1866, and this Henry Whitney Bellows called this conference. But guess what? Over the objection of some, the conference voted and reaffirmed the allegiance to the religion of Jesus Christ. And so folks like the Reverend Francis Ellingwood Abbott, dissenters like him, created their own group, the Free Religious Association, dedicated to forming an absolute, universal, non-sectarian religion that honored the religious impulse of all world religions, creed and doctrine free. The group started to decline right about the time that FirstU was established. The group started to decline in 1893 for a good reason, because there were many different organizations like them who were forming. The same issues of free thinking versus orthodoxy, growing interest in scientific thought and reason, an age of idealism and individualism caused Western Unitarians, like where I lived in the middle of the continent, you could say, to create their own networks and organizations separate from New England and East Coast established Unitarians. And as I said, Canadians were part of this too. Some of these free-thinking ministers and early proponents of humanism found their way into Canadian Unitarian congregations in the late 1800s and early 1900s and had quite an influence in Canadian Unitarianism. By the early 1900s, humanism was being held up as a new world religion. As a new world religion for modern man, as they said in those days, which incorporated the scientific and anti-supernatural thinking of the time. More and more Unitarian ministers and congregations were affirming humanism. At the annual meeting of the American Unitarian Association in 1934, as we do from time to time, an 8-member commission on appraisal was appointed to review the Unitarian movement and to make recommendations for the clarification of principles and for changes in policy and organization. Out of their work came the report entitled Unitarians Face a New Age. I got a copy of my own. It's very interesting to read, which in part stressed that Unitarians will not desire to Christianize the world because they believe that religion is deeper and more significant than any of its historical forms, even the Christian. This provided the official approval for a much broader expression of theological ideas, including something like humanism within the Unitarian movement. Reverend Don Rollins, in one of his sermons about humanism, actually I drew from his sermon that featured the Reverend Francis Ellingwood Abbott. This was the first I learned about him. I want to learn more about him. I'd like the courts to throw me out of the pulpit, right? I would love that argument. Anyway, Reverend Don Rollins notes Unitarian ministers, and they were mainly back in my home country, the Midwestern United States. For instance, among these rising humanist ministers and those who really defined the modern humanist movement was actually the brother of a former Vice President of the United States, Walter Mondale. His brother, Lester Mondale, was a signer of the Humanist Manifesto. And the Humanist Manifesto really rose up from Unitarians, but went international, you could say. And this was drafted in 1933. This manifesto, like I said, included signatures of Unitarian ministers and scholars and other scholars. And it had 15 theses. It asserted things like the universe is self-existing, not created. Human beings emerged from and remain a part of an evolutionary process, meaning revelation hasn't stopped. It's evolutionary. Culture and society are products of human interaction with their natural environment, while not denying the possibilities of realities not yet discovered. Less than a decade later, World War II, the Depression, also in that time, challenged liberal theology to account for mass evil. In response, humanism offered a grim indictment. There was no vengeful God to blame. We did it ourselves. By the time Unitarians and Universalists merged together in 1961, Unitarians overwhelmingly identified as humanists in some form or another. Secular humanists, rational humanists, natural humanists, religious humanists, there's a bunch of them. There is a quote from Nobel laureate Bertrand Russell that seems to sum up humanism the best. He said for himself, 3 passions, simple but overwhelmingly strong, have governed my life: the longing for love, the search for knowledge, and unbearable pity for the suffering of humanity. In other words, compassion, knowledge, understanding, and alleviating suffering is really the foundation of humanism. I grew up in the 60s in a Unitarian church, as I said, in Midwestern United States, not knowing this was the place where really humanism, as we know it today, arose. And it was the overwhelming choice of the adults in my congregation. I just shared with the few people gathered here, the worship team. I was in a congregation that if in the pulpit the minister dare said the word Jesus or God, every adult was like, oh, it was shocking. I always, as I say, I give you a context and usually a warning before I'm going to say such words. That was overwhelmingly the case in my congregation. In addition to it being humanist, what did that mean? And in that there was this can-do, optimistic spirit. We can do this. All seemed possible through protests, speaking out, going to the governmental councils and saying your piece, serving the greater community, and education for all. All of these things we could do by the nature of coming together as people. But humans aren't perfect, yes? Humans can let you down and hurt you sometimes too, yes? The UU Reverend Karen Solveig Anderson notes, humans will disappoint, betray, and otherwise fail me, she says. But they also have repeatedly saved me from a selfish meism that can destroy my well-being and lead me to false idols. They have loved me so fiercely that I am brought back from despair, loneliness, and isolation. They have cajoled me into my better self, when frankly, I sometimes don't want to bother with the effort. They have challenged me to aspire to possibilities that I fear are unattainable because they see something in me that I far too often can't see in myself. They are humans. And now remember, these are Karen's words that I'm about to say. Humans are the 4 F's. They are flawed, fragile, effed up, and fabulous. Most importantly, fabulous. This understanding is the humanism that has transcended the intellect, Karen says, buried itself inside me, and inspires me and heals me daily. The Unitarian humanists who wrote the manifesto were responding to an era in the midst of 2 world wars, the Great Depression, a time when God seemed absent. For them, it seemed a new religion was needed to respond to the times, one that relied on the courage and ingenuity of flawed and fabulous humans. In this time of uncertainty, what is the religious view that speaks to us, that speaks to you and me? May we not lose hope in ourselves and those around us and remain awake to the possible. Hold on to some of the optimism and can-do spirit of the Unitarian humanists that came before us and are a part of many strands of our faith tradition. In our day, may we be, as Reverend Megan Lloyd Joyner says, awake to all that is required of us as conscious and contentious people determined to make the world a better place for all the beings that reside on the planet, awake to the courage required to reverse the greatest effects of climate change, to the collaboration required to make lasting social change, to the commitment required to crack open the chains of racism and white supremacy that binds us all. And a final humanist prayer. I found my friend and colleague, the Reverend Rachel Tedesco. When she was still a student minister, I was in seminary with her, ended a sermon on humanism with this prayer. May the words and the spirit of the humanist inspire us to see the possible, to imagine a world where all human beings are seen as one human family, to imagine a world where we bring reason and intelligence, love and compassion to bear on all human problems, to imagine a world where all children are raised to be altruistic and caring, as well as self-respecting and self-sufficient, strong and healthy, imaginative and creative, to imagine a world where no one is oppressed and where everyone has the freedom to make meaningful choices for themselves, to realize their potentials, and to live full and satisfying lives. To imagine a world where we apply our reason and skills to protect the natural environment, the great interdependent web of which we are a part. And to imagine a world where we humans strive together to build a peaceful and prosperous world. May it be so. And let us sing number 131, Love Will Guide Us, from our hymnal.
Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard nights. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, you can give from deep within you. You can change the world with your love. Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard nights.
This is the time in our service that we usually accept the offering. You may go to our website or contact our finance manager to find out how you might keep up your pledge or make a donation during these times. We give these gifts freely. We receive these gifts gratefully. We dedicate these gifts to the work of our congregation, serving human wholeness, caring for the planet, upholding religious freedom, welcoming the stranger, and loving one another.
Before we extinguish the chalice, more words adapted from the Reverend Victoria Safford. This is a saving church. a saving congregation, and a congregation that acts and asks and wonders, unafraid of questions that may go unanswered, unafraid of answers that may challenge our assumptions. In the words of William Ellery Channing, a religion that will not content itself with a passive or hereditary faith, but opens itself to light whencesoever it may come. It does not mechanically copy the past, but listens for new and higher monitions of the conscience. May it be so.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, cool down in the vida spori de justiça, tenurimur cielum portuam, sans de viens vers moi, viens vers moi.
Go in peace, go in joy, go in love, enjoy the spring, and let love guide you.